My son's new wife called my lasagna trailer park slop at our family dinner, but she had no idea she was insulting the woman who secretly owned the five-star restaurant empire that would blacklist her from every fine dining establishment in the city and cost her the culinary career she thought she was building on stolen recipes from my private collection. Before we dive into this incredible story of culinary revenge and the $50 million restaurant empire my daughter-in-law never knew I controlled, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me about your worst experience with disrespectful in-laws who underestimated you, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one about what happens when people assume elderly grandmothers are just outdated home cooks and discover just how wrong they can be when arrogance meets expertise. That could destroy everything you've worked for. My name is Elena Rosetti, I'm 70 years old. And this story begins 18 months ago when I made what seemed like a generous decision to welcome my son Michael's new wife into our family by hosting an intimate dinner at my modest suburban home in Westfield, New Jersey, a decision that would reveal her true character and teach her the most expensive lesson about mocking the cooking of women whose culinary expertise and industry influence she couldn't even begin to comprehend, but to understand how. Victoria Sterling, the ambitious young chef who thought she could build her career by stealing from and humiliating elderly family members, ended up banned from every prestigious restaurant in 3 states and lost her dream job at the most exclusive culinary institute in the country. You need to know who I was before my carefully cultivated image as a simple Italian grandmother concealed one of the most powerful culinary empires in America for 47 years. I was Elena Rosetti, Executive Culinary Director and founding partner of Rosetti Hospitality Group, one of America's most influential restaurant conglomerates controlling 15 Michelin-starred establishments across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, 3 James Beard award-winning chefs, and the most exclusive culinary training academy on the East Coast. I wasn't just making Sunday gravy for my family, I was the strategic architect responsible for launching culinary careers worth millions of dollars and controlling the restaurant industry relationships that determined which chefs succeeded at the highest levels and which ones never worked in fine dining again. My responsibilities encompassed developing signature dishes that became industry standards throughout the Northeast culinary scene, mentoring young chefs who would go on to open their own acclaimed restaurants featured in Food and Wine and Bon Appetit, coordinating with food critics from the New York Times, Michelin Guide, and James Beard Foundation who could make or break culinary careers with a single review, and implementing the quality standards that preserved our reputation as the definitive authority on Italian-American fine dining across luxury markets throughout the tri-state area. But these achievements only tell part of the story about the complexity and critical importance of culinary influence at the highest levels of the restaurant industry. When you're responsible for maintaining Michelin star ratings that determine whether a restaurant survives or closes within 6 months, training chefs whose careers depend on your recommendations to elite establishments, and preserving family recipes that have been passed down through 4 generations of Italian culinary masters from the Amalfi Coast and Tuscany, every decision carries enormous weight and consequences that extend far beyond individual restaurant success to impact entire culinary communities and food industry ecosystems throughout the most competitive dining markets in America. During the 2020 pandemic that devastated restaurants and destroyed culinary careers throughout the country, eliminating over 250,000 restaurant jobs and closing nearly 17% of all dining establishments permanently, I coordinated protective strategies that literally saved dozens of establishments and hundreds of culinary jobs across our network. Working 18-hour days for 6 months straight, I restructured restaurant operations in real time, negotiated with suppliers and landlords to prevent closures of beloved establishments that had taken decades to build their reputations, managed staff transitions that kept talented chefs employed during the industry crisis when most restaurants were laying off entire kitchen staff, and implemented delivery and takeout systems that allowed family restaurants to survive while maintaining the quality standards that had taken generations to establish and perfect. I remember specifically working with the Benedetto family, who owned a small but renowned Italian restaurant in Little Italy that had been serving authentic regional cuisine for 3 generations, specializing in dishes from their ancestral village in Calabria. When the lockdowns hit, their entire operation was threatened by capacity restrictions and supply chain disruptions that made it impossible to source the specific imported ingredients that made their dishes authentic. I coordinated with my network of European suppliers, helped them transition to a premium delivery model that preserved the integrity of their traditional preparations, and provided the industry connections that not only saved their restaurant, but actually allowed them to expand into catering for high-end private events during a time when most restaurants were struggling just to survive the month-to-month uncertainty and financial devastation. The Benedetto restaurant, which had been on the verge of closing permanently and losing their family's culinary legacy, Not only survived but thrived during the pandemic, eventually opening a second location in Brooklyn Heights and receiving a James Beard nomination for Outstanding Service in 2022. Their success became a model for other traditional Italian restaurants facing similar challenges, and their story was featured in a New York Times article about restaurant resilience that specifically credited Rosetti Hospitality Group's guidance and industry connections for their remarkable turnaround and expansion. Rosetti Hospitality Group specialized in authentic Italian cuisine, chef training and placement, restaurant consulting, and maintaining the industry relationships that determined which establishments received recognition from food critics, guidebooks, and culinary publications. A mistake in recipe development could cost restaurants their signature dishes and competitive advantage in markets where diners could distinguish between authentic and imitation Italian cuisine. Errors in chef recommendations could result in kitchen disasters and professional failures that ended careers before they started. Failures in quality control could lead to restaurants losing their reputations and loyal customer bases that had taken years to build through consistent excellence. And authentic culinary experiences that transport diners to specific regions of Italy. My expertise in high-level culinary operations extended beyond our restaurant group to consulting relationships with culinary schools including the Culinary Institute of America, food magazines like Siva and Food and Wine, and industry organizations throughout the Northeast including the Italian Trade Agency and Slow Food International. I helped establish the curriculum standards that determined which chefs were qualified for positions at prestigious restaurants, trained food critics in authentic Italian cooking techniques and ingredient sourcing so they could properly evaluate restaurants claiming authenticity, and developed the certification programs that smaller restaurants could use to verify their authenticity and quality to discerning customers who valued genuine culinary expertise over trendy fusion concepts that bastardized traditional techniques. Point 1. Of my most significant consulting achievements involved working with the International Culinary Institute in Manhattan, which managed over $200 million in culinary education assets and trained chefs for restaurants worldwide, including many Michelin-starred establishments in Europe and America. The institute was facing potential accreditation loss due to outdated curriculum and faculty conflicts over traditional versus modern cooking methods, with younger instructors pushing molecular gastronomy techniques while older faculty insisted on classical French foundations, creating confusion and inconsistency in graduate preparation. I spent 2 years restructuring their Italian cuisine program, implementing hands-on training protocols that resolved faculty disputes by creating separate tracks for traditional and contemporary approaches, and creating authentic cooking standards based on regional Italian techniques that actually increased their graduate placement rates by 85% while preserving traditional methods for future generations of chefs. The program became so successful that it attracted students from culinary schools across Europe who specifically came to New York to study authentic Italian techniques that couldn't be learned anywhere else in America. These consulting opportunities provided substantial additional income that enhanced our family's already comfortable financial position, but more importantly, they gave me comprehensive understanding of how culinary talent is developed, how professional kitchens function under the extreme pressure of maintaining excellence in competitive markets, and how family members often underestimate elderly relatives' expertise and industry influence when they assume those relatives are just old-fashioned home cooks, rather than recognizing their sophisticated understanding of professional culinary arts and restaurant industry dynamics that control careers and determine success at the highest levels. The most disturbing cases I encountered during my consulting work involved young chefs who systematically exploited elderly family members' recipes and cooking knowledge, treating traditional techniques as free resources to be appropriated rather than understanding the generations of expertise and cultural heritage that these recipes represented. I witnessed situations where culinary school graduates, trained professionals who should have understood the value of traditional techniques and the ethics of intellectual property in the food industry, would manipulate their aging relatives into sharing family recipes under false pretenses, claiming academic interest or family preservation projects while actually planning to use that knowledge for their own restaurant ventures or cookbook projects without proper attribution, compensation, or respect. I remember the case of Sofia Martinelli, an 82-year-old Italian immigrant whose granddaughter convinced her to demonstrate her traditional sauce-making techniques for what was supposedly a family documentary project, to preserve their heritage for future generations. Sofia believed she was sharing family traditions with a loving granddaughter who wanted to maintain their cultural connections, but I discovered through industry contacts that the granddaughter had actually been recording these sessions to steal proprietary recipes for her new restaurant venture. The granddaughter's restaurant became successful in the trendy Tribeca neighborhood by serving authentic family recipes passed down through generations, which were actually Sophia's closely guarded culinary secrets, techniques for making pasta. Sauce that had been refined over 60 years of cooking and contained specific ingredient ratios and preparation methods that Sophia had never written down because they represented intimate family knowledge meant to be shared only with trusted relatives who would honor their significance and cultural importance. When I investigated further, I discovered that the granddaughter had not only stolen Sophia's recipes but was actively marketing them as her own innovative interpretations of traditional Italian cuisine, charging $45 for pasta dishes that used Sophia's exact sauce recipes while describing herself in interviews as a self-taught chef who developed her signature sauces through years of experimentation. The emotional devastation to Sophia when she learned about this betrayal was heartbreaking. She felt that her own family had violated the trust and cultural traditions that represented her connection to her ancestry and heritage, but beyond professional achievements and expertise, my culinary career had taught me invaluable lessons about respect, tradition, and how people's behavior changes dramatically when they believe they can exploit elderly family members who appear to be simple home cooks but may actually control significant influence and resources in the professional culinary world that could make or break their careers with a single phone call or industry recommendation. I had observed thousands of family culinary dynamics during restaurant consultations and chef training programs over 4 decades. I had seen devoted families who honored elderly relatives' cooking traditions and included them respectfully in professional kitchen operations, making efforts to preserve authentic techniques while adapting them for modern restaurant service that maintained the integrity and cultural significance of traditional preparations. These families understood that elderly relatives' cooking knowledge represented generations of refinement and expertise that deserved respect, proper attribution, and inclusion in any commercial applications, but I had also witnessed families who dismissed elderly members' cooking as outdated when modern techniques became expensive to maintain, who viewed traditional recipes as obstacles to innovation rather than understanding that authentic culinary knowledge represents generations of refined expertise that forms the foundation for contemporary culinary excellence. These families treated elderly relatives as inconvenient holders of old-fashioned methods rather than recognizing them as masters of techniques that modern chefs spend years trying to learn and often never fully master. These observations had given me sophisticated understanding of culinary exploitation patterns and the warning signs that indicate when people view elderly relatives' cooking knowledge as free resources to be taken rather than understanding that family recipes and traditional techniques should be honored and preserved through respectful collaboration rather than theft and commercial appropriation without acknowledgement, compensation, or cultural sensitivity. The warning signs were always similar: young chefs who suddenly became very interested in learning family traditions when they were starting their own restaurants or cookbook projects, timing their interest to coincide with their professional needs rather than demonstrating genuine respect for family heritage. Culinary professionals who moved back into family homes claiming temporary financial difficulties while actually planning to document and steal proprietary recipes and techniques that had taken generations to perfect through careful refinement and cultural transmission. Food industry workers who gradually gained access to elderly relatives' recipe collections, cooking notes, and traditional techniques under the guise of preserving family heritage, while actually cataloging valuable culinary intellectual property for their own commercial use, often photographing handwritten recipes and filming cooking demonstrations without revealing their true intentions to commercialize this knowledge for personal profit. Most concerning were the culinary professionals who systematically isolated their elderly relatives from other family members, friends, and industry professionals who might question unusual interest in family recipes or recognize signs of intellectual property theft. These manipulative family members would convince their relatives that other people were jealous of their cooking abilities, that food critics were trying to steal their techniques for publication, and that only their devoted younger relative could be trusted to properly preserve and honor family culinary traditions while actually planning to exploit that trust for commercial gain and professional advancement. My marriage to Antonio Rosetti had been a partnership built on shared passion for authentic Italian cuisine, complementary culinary skills, and commitment to preserving traditional techniques while building a restaurant empire that honored our family's culinary heritage from different regions of Italy. Antonio was a classically trained chef who had immigrated from Naples in 1962 and started with a small neighborhood restaurant in Brooklyn's Bensonhurst, gradually building an impressive portfolio of establishments throughout the metropolitan area that specialized in regional Italian cuisine from different provinces, each restaurant focusing on authentic dishes from specific areas like Tuscany, Sicily, Calabria, and the Amalfi Coast. Antonio's culinary philosophy was methodical and authentically brilliant. he identified underserved markets for specific regional Italian cuisines before other restaurateurs recognized the demand, developed relationships with authentic ingredient suppliers in Italy before other restaurants discovered them, and created dining experiences that transported customers to specific regions of Italy through carefully researched traditional recipes and cooking techniques that couldn't be replicated by restaurants that prioritized quick preparation over authentic flavors and traditional methods that required patience, skill, and respect for cultural heritage. Antonio had an exceptional understanding of regional Italian cuisine variations and the cultural significance of traditional cooking methods. In 1985, he opened our first upscale restaurant, Nana's Table, in Little Italy, specializing in Neapolitan cuisine that featured his grandmother's recipe for authentic pizza napolitana made in a wood-fired oven imported directly from Naples. Most American restaurants were serving thick-crust pizza with processed cheese and artificial ingredients, but Antonio insisted on using San Marzano tomatoes, buffalo mozzarella, and 00 flour imported from Italy, even though these ingredients cost 3 times more than domestic alternatives. His commitment to authenticity proved prescient. By 1995, Nana's Table had become one of the most acclaimed Italian restaurants in New York City, receiving a James Beard nomination and earning recognition from food critics who praised its authentic Neapolitan cuisine that rivaled restaurants in Naples itself. The success attracted attention from food magazines and culinary schools, and Antonio became a consultant for other restaurants trying to achieve similar authenticity and quality standards. Over 30 years of careful expansion and quality maintenance, Antonio had built a restaurant empire that included 12 establishments strategically located throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. These restaurants employed over 300 people, including classically trained chefs who had studied in Italy, servers who understood Italian wine pairings and regional cuisine differences, and management staff who maintained the exacting standards that preserved our reputation as the definitive authority on authentic Italian dining in the northeastern United States. Antonio's approach to restaurant management was based on the principle that sustainable success required building genuine relationships with customers based on consistent quality, authentic preparation, and cultural respect that honored the traditions and heritage that made Italian cuisine distinctive and valuable. He maintained reasonable prices that allowed working families to experience authentic Italian dining, invested consistently in staff training and professional development that created career advancement opportunities, and provided the kind of consistent quality that built customer loyalty spanning multiple generations. One example of Antonio's management philosophy involved a small family bakery that had supplied our restaurants with authentic Italian bread for over 20 years. When the bakery faced financial difficulties during the 2008 recession, many restaurant owners would have switched to cheaper suppliers or demanded reduced prices that could have forced the bakery out of business. Instead, Antonio worked with the family to restructure their supply arrangements temporarily, provided interest-free loans to help them upgrade their equipment, and actually increased our orders to help them maintain profitability during the economic downturn. The bakery not only survived the recession but became one of the most successful specialty food suppliers in the metropolitan area, eventually expanding to serve restaurants throughout New York and New Jersey. Their loyalty to our restaurant group created a competitive advantage because they provided us with exclusive access to their most popular products and gave us priority during high-demand periods like holidays when other restaurants couldn't get adequate supplies of authentic Italian bread and pastries. The restaurant portfolio had reached $50 million in combined value by 2018, generating monthly revenue of $420,000 from customers who valued authentic Italian dining experiences and were willing to pay premium prices for dishes prepared using traditional techniques, imported ingredients, and recipes that had been preserved and refined through generations of Italian culinary expertise. Our restaurants consistently maintained occupancy rates above 85% even during slow periods, and our reservation waiting lists during peak dining times often extended 3 weeks in advance. But Antonio was also a keen observer of human nature, who had noticed concerning patterns in family members' approaches to our culinary knowledge, traditional recipes, and industry relationships that suggested some relatives might not understand the value and complexity of what we had built and preserved through decades of professional dedication and respect for authentic Italian culinary traditions. Elena, our recipes and techniques represent 4 generations of Italian culinary expertise, Antonio had explained to me during one of our conversations about family legacy and preserving traditional cooking knowledge for future generations who would honor and respect their cultural significance. But some family members seem to view our cooking as simple home food rather than understanding that these recipes contain professional-level knowledge that could be worth enormous amounts in the wrong hands if someone decided to commercialize them without proper respect and attribution. When I watch younger relatives observe our cooking, I see them treating our techniques as curiosities rather than understanding that what we do in our home kitchen represents the same level of expertise that we use in our professional restaurants. He continued with concern about family members who didn't appreciate the sophistication and value of traditional Italian cooking methods. They don't realize that our Sunday sauce recipe alone contains techniques that culinary school students spend months trying to master, or that our pasta-making methods could be the foundation for a successful restaurant if someone understood their significance and commercial potential. Antonio had noticed that some family members seemed more interested in documenting our cooking methods than in learning about their cultural significance or family heritage. During family gatherings, certain relatives would ask detailed questions about ingredient ratios, cooking times, and preparation techniques while taking notes or photos, claiming interest in family traditions but demonstrating the kind of systematic documentation that suggested commercial rather than cultural motivations. I'm concerned that some people view our family recipes as resources to be collected rather than traditions to be honored, Antonio had observed during one family dinner when several relatives spent more time photographing our food preparation than participating in family conversation. Traditional cooking knowledge should be shared through relationships and respect, not extracted like business information for personal advantage. These observations proved to be prophetic when we met Victoria Sterling, the ambitious young woman who would marry our son Michael and demonstrate exactly how family culinary knowledge could be exploited by someone who viewed elderly relatives as sources of free expertise rather than masters of traditional techniques deserving respect and cultural appreciation. The stage was being set for a family dinner that would test whether my son's new wife viewed me as a family member deserving respect and inclusion, or as an elderly home cook whose traditional methods could be mocked and dismissed by someone who assumed her culinary school credentials made her superior to generations of authentic Italian cooking expertise that she couldn't even begin to comprehend or appreciate. But Victoria Sterling had no idea that the woman whose cooking she was preparing to insult controlled the culinary empire that could either launch her career to extraordinary heights or destroy it so completely that she would never work in a professional kitchen again. The modest suburban kitchen where I would prepare our family dinner contained the same expertise and traditional knowledge that had built a $50 million restaurant empire, earned James Beard recognition, and trained dozens of chefs who now operated successful establishments throughout the most competitive culinary markets in America. The family dinner that seemed like a simple welcome celebration would become the most expensive meal of Victoria's life, and the lasagna she was about to insult would cost her everything she thought she was building toward in the culinary world, where reputation, relationships, and respect for tradition determine who succeeds and who disappears into obscurity without ever understanding what went wrong. Looking back now with the clarity that comes from watching someone's true character emerge through their treatment of family members they consider beneath them, I can see that Victoria Sterling's assumptions about my cooking abilities weren't sudden judgments formed during our first family dinner. They were carefully calculated assessments based on her belief that elderly Italian grandmothers represented outdated cooking methods that sophisticated culinary professionals like herself had evolved beyond through formal education and modern techniques. From the moment my son Michael first introduced Victoria to our family during a casual Sunday dinner in September 2022, she demonstrated the kind of polite condescension that reveals someone's true attitudes about traditional cooking and the women who preserve these techniques through generations of family practice. Victoria had graduated from the Culinary Institute of America with honors, completed an internship at a trendy fusion restaurant in Manhattan, and recently secured a position as sous chef at Eleve, a contemporary American restaurant in Soho that specialized in what food critics called innovative interpretations of classic comfort foods. Victoria's professional credentials were impressive on paper, and she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who believed formal culinary education and restaurant experience automatically qualified her as superior to home cooks who had learned through family tradition rather than institutional training. She spoke fluently about molecular gastronomy techniques, modern plating aesthetics, and contemporary ingredient sourcing that prioritized novelty and visual impact over traditional flavors and time-tested preparation methods that had satisfied families for generations. But what struck me immediately about Victoria's approach to food and cooking was her dismissive attitude toward any culinary techniques that couldn't be traced to formal training or contemporary restaurant trends. When she observed my kitchen during that first family dinner, her reactions revealed someone who viewed traditional cooking methods as quaint artifacts rather than sophisticated techniques that contained generations of refined expertise and cultural knowledge. "Oh, you still use a traditional pasta machine," she had commented while watching me prepare fresh linguine for our Sunday dinner, her tone suggesting that hand-cranked pasta making was charming but inefficient compared to modern kitchen equipment. Most professional kitchens have switched to electric pasta makers that can produce consistent results much faster than manual methods. The texture is actually more uniform when you can control the pressure and timing electronically. I learned to make pasta from my grandmother, who learned from her mother in Tuscany, I had replied, continuing to work the dough through the machine with the rhythm and technique that had been passed down through 4 generations of Italian women who understood that pasta making was as much about feeling and intuition as it was about mechanical process. "That's so authentic," Victoria had responded with the kind of enthusiasm that sounded appreciative but actually conveyed condescension, as if authenticity was a quaint concept that had value primarily as nostalgia rather than representing superior techniques and deeper understanding of how ingredients should be treated to achieve optimal flavor and texture. It must be nice to maintain those old family traditions, even if they take longer than contemporary methods. This exchange established the dynamic that would characterize Victoria's relationship with my cooking throughout the 18 months leading up to the family dinner that would destroy her career. She consistently positioned herself as the educated professional who appreciated traditional techniques for their cultural significance while simultaneously making it clear that she considered formal training and modern methods superior in terms of efficiency, consistency, and culinary sophistication. Victoria's background had prepared her to view cooking through the lens of restaurant efficiency and contemporary culinary trends rather than understanding that traditional techniques often produce superior results precisely because they prioritize flavor development and ingredient integrity over speed and convenience. Her culinary education had taught her to analyze dishes based on presentation aesthetics, profit margins, and preparation speed, metrics that completely missed the deeper principles of authentic Italian cooking that focused on ingredient quality, technique mastery, and cultural respect. During subsequent family gatherings, Victoria's comments about my cooking revealed a pattern of subtle criticism disguised as professional interest and educational curiosity. She would ask questions about my cooking methods that seemed respectful but actually demonstrated her assumption that traditional techniques needed improvement through modern application and scientific understanding. "Elena, I'm curious about your tomato sauce recipe," she had said during a family dinner in November 2022, watching me prepare my Sunday gravy that had been simmering for 6 hours with San Marzano tomatoes, fresh basil, and olive oil imported directly from our family supplier in Tuscany. "Have you ever experimented with adding umami enhancers like fish sauce or miso paste? Some contemporary Italian restaurants are incorporating these ingredients to intensify flavor profiles without extending cooking times. My sauce recipe has been refined over 60 years of cooking," I had explained patiently, stirring the gravy that filled our kitchen with the aroma of authentic Italian cuisine that transported me back to my grandmother's kitchen in Brooklyn, where I had first learned these techniques as a young girl. "The flavor comes from using the finest ingredients and allowing them time to develop complexity through slow cooking. When you use authentic San Marzano tomatoes and first pressing olive oil, you don't need artificial flavor enhancers because the ingredients provide all the depth and richness you could want." "Oh, I didn't mean artificial enhancers," Victoria had quickly clarified, apparently realizing that her suggestion might have sounded disrespectful. "I was thinking about natural umami sources that could complement the traditional flavors while reducing cooking time for busy families who might not have 6 hours for sauce preparation." But her clarification actually revealed the deeper problem with her approach to traditional cooking. Victoria consistently focused on efficiency and time-saving modifications rather than understanding that slow cooking wasn't an inconvenience to be eliminated. It was an essential component of the technique that allowed flavors to develop properly and created the complex taste profiles that made authentic Italian cuisine distinctive and valuable. Victoria's attitude toward my cooking reflected broader assumptions about elderly Italian women and their role in contemporary culinary culture. To her, I represented a generation of home cooks whose techniques had historical interest but limited relevance to modern culinary arts that prioritized innovation, efficiency, and scientific understanding over tradition, patience, and cultural preservation. She consistently treated my cooking knowledge as folklore rather than expertise, asking questions that seemed designed to gather information for her own professional advancement rather than demonstrating genuine respect for the techniques and cultural heritage that my recipes represented. During family gatherings, she would take notes about ingredient ratios and preparation methods while framing her interest as preserving family traditions, but her questions revealed commercial rather than cultural motivations. "Elena, would you mind sharing the exact measurements for your risotto recipe?" she had asked during a Christmas dinner in 2022, producing a small notebook that she claimed was for documenting family recipes for future generations. I'd love to make sure I understand the traditional proportions and techniques so I can preserve them accurately for when Michael and I have children who might want to learn authentic Italian cooking. The request seemed reasonable and even thoughtful, but I noticed that Victoria's questions focused on specific details that would allow her to recreate my dishes rather than understanding the cultural context and family heritage that gave these recipes their significance and meaning. She was treating my cooking knowledge as information to be collected rather than traditions to be honored through respectful learning and cultural appreciation. Risotto isn't really about exact measurements, I had explained, watching her pen hover over her notebook as she waited for precise ratios that would allow her to reproduce my dish without understanding the intuitive adjustments and sensory cues that actually determine successful risotto preparation. It's about understanding how the rice absorbs liquid, feeling when the texture is correct, and adjusting the heat and stirring rhythm based on how the dish develops during cooking. But there must be some basic proportions that provide a starting point, Victoria had persisted, clearly frustrated that I wasn't providing the quantifiable information she wanted to document. Even traditional cooking has fundamental ratios that can be recorded and reproduced consistently. Her insistence on reducing my cooking to measurable formulas revealed that she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of traditional Italian cooking, which relied on sensory experience, intuitive adjustments, and deep familiarity with ingredients and techniques that couldn't be captured in written recipes or learned through formal instruction alone. Victoria's approach to my kitchen during family visits further demonstrated her assumptions about the limitations of traditional cooking methods and equipment. She would examine my tools and ingredients with the polite interest of someone touring a historical exhibit, making comments that revealed her belief that contemporary kitchen technology and modern ingredient sourcing had surpassed the methods I used to create meals that consistently impressed our family and guests. "This is such a beautiful traditional kitchen," she had commented during a family gathering in early 2023, examining my collection of hand-forged Italian knives, traditional pasta tools, and copper cookware that Antonio and I had collected during decades of culinary travel and professional relationships with authentic Italian suppliers. It must be challenging to maintain consistent results without digital temperature controls and precision timing equipment. Traditional tools often provide better results than modern equipment when you understand how to use them properly, I had replied, watching her handle my grandmother's wooden pasta board with the careful curiosity of someone examining an antique rather than recognizing it as a professional quality tool that produced superior pasta texture compared to contemporary alternatives. "I'm sure they do, for traditional preparations," Victoria had agreed with diplomatic enthusiasm that avoided direct contradiction while implying that traditional methods had limited applications in contemporary culinary contexts. But modern equipment can help reproduce traditional results more consistently while allowing for creative variations and contemporary presentations that appeal to broader audiences. Victoria consistently framed our conversations about cooking in terms of limitations and improvements rather than understanding that traditional techniques often produced superior results precisely because they had been refined through generations of practice and cultural transmission. Her culinary education had taught her to value innovation and efficiency over tradition and patience, creating blind spots that prevented her from recognizing the sophistication and expertise that my cooking actually represented. But the most revealing aspect of Victoria's attitude toward my cooking was her assumption that my techniques and recipes were freely available for her to study, document, and potentially incorporate into her own professional cooking without any acknowledgement of their cultural significance or intellectual property value. She treated my family recipes as public domain information rather than understanding that traditional cooking knowledge represented generations of expertise that deserved respect and proper attribution if used in professional contexts. During a family gathering in March 2023, Victoria had casually mentioned that she was developing new menu items for her restaurant that drew inspiration from traditional Italian home cooking techniques she had been researching and updating for contemporary audiences. When pressed for details, she explained that she was creating elevated versions of classic Italian dishes that maintained authentic flavor profiles while incorporating modern presentation aesthetics and efficiency improvements. "I'm working on a deconstructed lasagna that captures all the traditional flavors but presents them in a contemporary format that's more suitable for fine dining service," she had explained with obvious pride in her innovative approach to traditional cuisine. "Instead of layered pasta, I'm using handmade pasta sheets as a base, with the ricotta mixture formed into quenelles, and the meat sauce presented as a concentrated reduction that intensifies the flavor while requiring smaller portions." "What recipe are you using as the foundation for these traditional flavors?" I had asked, curious about whether her research had included studying the techniques and ingredients that actually created authentic Italian lasagna rather than simply appropriating familiar flavor combinations for contemporary presentations. I've been analyzing several traditional recipes and identifying the essential flavor components that can be preserved while updating the preparation and presentation methods, Victoria had replied with the confident terminology of someone who believed that traditional cooking could be improved through scientific analysis and contemporary technique application, but her explanation revealed that she was treating traditional recipes as raw material for her own creative interpretations, rather than understanding that authentic Italian dishes achieved their distinctive character through specific techniques, ingredient relationships, and cultural traditions that couldn't be updated without losing their essential authenticity and cultural significance. Victoria's restaurant position at Eleve had reinforced her assumptions about the superiority of contemporary culinary approaches over traditional methods. The restaurant specialized in what its chef owner called reimagined comfort food that took familiar dishes and elevated them through modern techniques, premium ingredients, and artistic presentations that justified charging $35 for macaroni and cheese and $45 for deconstructed chicken and waffles. Working in this environment had taught Victoria to view traditional cooking as source material for contemporary interpretation rather than understanding that authentic traditional dishes already represented sophisticated culinary achievement that didn't require improvement or reimagining. Her professional success had come from participating in the contemporary culinary trend of appropriating traditional recipes and presenting them as innovative creations through modified techniques and upscale presentations. Our menu philosophy is about honoring traditional flavors while bringing them into contemporary culinary contexts, Victoria had explained when describing her work at Eleve during a family dinner conversation. We respect the cultural heritage of classic dishes while making them relevant to modern diners who appreciate both authenticity and innovation. But this philosophy actually represented cultural appropriation rather than cultural respect, taking traditional recipes developed through generations of family practice and commercial exploitation without acknowledging their origins or compensating the communities that had preserved and refined these techniques through centuries of cultural transmission and family dedication. Victoria's confidence about her ability to improve traditional cooking had grown throughout her first year of marriage to Michael, particularly as she gained more responsibility at Eleve and received positive feedback from restaurant customers who appreciated the familiar flavors presented in contemporary formats that made them feel sophisticated about eating comfort food in upscale dining contexts. Her success with reimagined, traditional dishes had convinced Victoria that she understood the essential principles of authentic cooking well enough to modify and improve traditional techniques through formal culinary training and modern kitchen science. She began speaking about traditional Italian cooking with the authority of someone who believed that analyzing and deconstructing traditional recipes had given her expertise equivalent to generations of family practice and cultural immersion. The thing about traditional cooking is that it often achieves excellent results through inefficient methods that can be streamlined without losing the essential character of the dishes, Victoria had explained during a conversation about Italian cuisine and contemporary restaurant trends. When you understand the science behind traditional techniques, you can preserve the important elements while eliminating unnecessary steps and improving consistency through modern equipment and precision control. This attitude revealed Victoria's fundamental misunderstanding of traditional cooking, which achieved its results not despite traditional methods but because of them. Traditional techniques had been refined through generations of practice specifically because they produced superior results, and attempting to streamline them usually eliminated the precise elements that created authentic flavors and textures. But Victoria's professional success and growing confidence in her culinary abilities had created a sense of authority that extended beyond her actual expertise, particularly in her interactions with family members whose cooking she viewed through the lens of her formal training and contemporary restaurant experience. By the spring of 2023, Victoria had established herself as the family's unofficial culinary expert, offering suggestions about menu planning for family gatherings, commenting on traditional cooking methods with the authority of professional experience, and positioning herself as the bridge between our family's traditional Italian cooking and contemporary culinary culture that valued innovation and efficiency over cultural preservation and traditional expertise. I think it would be wonderful if Elena could share some of her traditional recipes with a broader audience, Victoria had suggested during a family conversation about cooking and cultural heritage. These family techniques have such authentic character that they could really inspire contemporary chefs who are interested in traditional Italian flavors but want to present them in modern contexts. Traditional family recipes are usually shared within families rather than published for commercial use, I had replied, testing whether Victoria understood the cultural and intellectual property considerations that surrounded traditional cooking knowledge and family culinary heritage. Oh, I didn't mean commercial publication, Victoria had clarified quickly, apparently realizing that her suggestion might have sounded inappropriate. I was thinking more about cultural preservation and educational sharing that could help maintain traditional techniques for future generations who might not have access to authentic family cooking knowledge. But her clarification actually revealed that she didn't understand the difference between cultural preservation within families and communities versus commercial appropriation that extracted traditional knowledge for contemporary use without proper attribution, cultural context, or respect for the communities that had developed and preserved these techniques through generations of practice and cultural transmission. Victoria's growing confidence in her culinary expertise and her assumptions about traditional cooking had set the stage for the family dinner that would reveal her true character and cost her everything she thought she was building in the culinary world, where reputation, relationships, and respect for tradition determined who succeeded and who disappeared into professional obscurity. The modest suburban kitchen where I prepared our family meals had become, in Victoria's mind, a laboratory for studying traditional techniques that she could analyze, improve, and incorporate into her own professional cooking without understanding that she was observing one of the most sophisticated culinary operations in America, run by someone whose expertise and industry influence exceeded her own by decades of experience and millions of dollars in restaurant empire value. Victoria had no idea that the woman whose cooking she planned to evaluate and potentially improve controlled the very industry connections and professional relationships that could determine whether her culinary career flourished or ended before she ever understood what had gone wrong. The family dinner that seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate her superior culinary knowledge would become the most expensive lesson of her life about the true meaning of respect, tradition, and the cost of assumptions about elderly women, whose cooking expertise she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The stage was set for Victoria Sterling to reveal whether she understood that family relationships required respect and humility, or whether she would choose to demonstrate the arrogance and cultural insensitivity that would destroy her culinary career and teach her that some elderly Italian grandmothers possess the power to either elevate promising young chefs to extraordinary success or eliminate them from the industry entirely based on how they treat traditional cooking knowledge, and the women who preserve these techniques through generations of family dedication and cultural pride. The lasagna I was preparing for our family dinner contained the same level of expertise and traditional knowledge that had built a $50 million restaurant empire, but to Victoria, it represented an opportunity to showcase her superior culinary education and contemporary cooking insights. Her assumption that traditional Italian cooking needed improvement through modern techniques and professional expertise would cost her more than she could possibly imagine, and the family meal that should have been a celebration of welcoming her into our family would become the beginning of consequences that would teach her the true value of respecting elderly relatives and honoring the cultural traditions they represent. While Victoria Sterling was documenting my quaint family recipes and suggesting improvements to my outdated cooking methods, she had absolutely no idea that she was critiquing the culinary techniques of someone whose expertise and industry influence could destroy her career with a single phone call to the right food critic or restaurant owner. The woman she viewed as a traditional Italian grandmother whose cooking needed modernization was actually Elena Rosetti, the hidden power behind the most influential culinary empire on the East Coast, whose recommendations could launch careers to James Beard Award levels or end them before they started. What Victoria didn't know, and what my son Michael had never fully understood despite growing up surrounded by our success, was that the modest 3-bedroom house in Westfield, New Jersey, where I prepared our family meals, was just one property in a real estate portfolio worth over $50 million. The kitchen where Victoria observed my inefficient traditional methods was actually my personal testing laboratory, where I developed and refined recipes that would later appear in Michelin-starred restaurants, be featured in Food and Wine magazine, and generate millions of dollars in revenue for establishments throughout the Northeast. The copper cookware that Victoria examined with polite curiosity wasn't just family heirloom kitchen equipment. It was professional-grade Italian cookware that cost more than most people's annual salaries, hand-forged by artisans in Tuscany, who supplied the same equipment to the world's most exclusive restaurants. The pasta machine she described as charmingly traditional was a custom piece that I had commissioned from the same craftsman who made equipment for restaurants in Bologna and Rome, where authentic pasta-making techniques were preserved and protected as cultural heritage. Every ingredient in my seemingly simple suburban pantry represented relationships and sourcing networks that Victoria's restaurant could never access independently. The San Marzano tomatoes I used for my Sunday sauce came directly from our exclusive Supplier in Campania, who provided the same tomatoes to only 12 restaurants worldwide, all of them Michelin-starred establishments that paid premium prices for authenticity that couldn't be replicated through mass-market ingredients or commercial food service suppliers. The olive oil that Victoria assumed was standard grocery store product was actually first pressing oil from trees that our family had owned in Tuscany for 3 generations, produced in quantities so limited that we allocated it only to our most prestigious restaurants and reserved the finest batches for recipe development and special occasions. A single bottle of this oil cost more than most restaurants spent on ingredients for an entire week of service, and the flavor profile was so distinctive that food critics could identify dishes prepared with it in blind tastings. But beyond the premium ingredients and professional equipment, what Victoria completely failed to recognize was that my home cooking represented the same level of expertise and technique mastery that had earned our restaurants international recognition and industry awards. The 6-hour sauce preparation that she viewed as inefficient time management was actually a precise technique that I had refined through decades of professional cooking and taught to chefs who now operated successful restaurants throughout the United States and Europe. My pasta-making methods that Victoria considered quaint and traditional were actually advanced techniques that culinary school students spent months trying to master, often without achieving the consistency and texture that I could produce intuitively. Through 47 years of professional experience and cultural immersion, the traditional family recipes that she was documenting in her notebook were actually proprietary formulations that represented millions of dollars in intellectual property and competitive advantage for our restaurant empire. The lasagna recipe that Victoria would soon insult as trailer park slop was actually the foundation for a dish that appeared on the menu at La Tavola, our flagship restaurant in Manhattan's Upper East Side, where it was served as lasagna della nonna and cost $65 per portion. Food critics from the New York Times, Zagat, and James Beard Foundation had specifically praised this dish as the definitive example of authentic Italian comfort food elevated to fine dining excellence without losing its soul or cultural authenticity. Every technique that Victoria observed during our family dinners, from my hand-rolled pasta methods to my sauce seasoning adjustments, represented knowledge that professional chefs paid thousands of dollars to learn through our culinary training programs at the Rosetti Academy, our exclusive cooking school that trained chefs for Michelin-starred restaurants throughout North America and Europe. The Rosetti Academy was perhaps the most exclusive culinary institution in America, accepting only 12 students per year through an application process more competitive than Harvard Medical School. Our graduates commanded starting salaries of $150,000 annually at the world's most prestigious restaurants, and our alumni included 3 James Beard Award winners, 5 Michelin-starred head chefs, and the culinary directors of luxury hotel chains throughout Europe and Asia. Students paid $85,000 for our intensive 6-month program, which included hands-on training in traditional Italian techniques, internships at our Michelin-starred restaurants, and personal mentorship from me and our network of internationally acclaimed chefs. The waiting list for admission extended 3 years, and we regularly turned away culinary school graduates from prestigious institutions who didn't meet our standards for technique mastery, cultural understanding, and professional dedication. What made our program unique wasn't just the training quality, it was the industry connections and career placement services that came with graduation. Rosetti Academy graduates had automatic access to positions at restaurants that never advertised job openings, received personal recommendations from food critics and industry leaders, and could leverage our network of alumni and industry partners to build careers that would be impossible to achieve through traditional culinary education and industry networking. Victoria's restaurant, Eleve, where she worked as sous chef and believed she was building an impressive culinary career, was actually part of a restaurant group that depended on relationships with our supplier network for premium ingredients and specialty items that created their competitive advantage. The artisanal cheeses, imported charcuterie, and specialty pasta that allowed Eleve to charge premium prices for their elevated comfort food came through distribution networks that we controlled through exclusive agreements and long-term partnerships with European producers. More significantly, Eleve's head chef, Marcus Webb, was actually a Rosetti Academy graduate from our 2018 class who had secured his position through our career placement services and maintained ongoing relationships with our restaurant group for consulting, staff training, and menu development. The signature dishes that had made Eleve successful and earned Victoria her promotion to sous chef were actually adaptations of techniques and flavor profiles that Marcus had learned during his training at our academy. The innovative comfort food concept that Victoria believed represented cutting-edge culinary creativity was actually a restaurant model that we had developed and implemented successfully at 3 of our own establishments before licensing the concept to independent Restaurant groups who paid substantial fees for access to our recipes, techniques, and operational systems. Victoria's professional success, her current position, and her career advancement opportunities were all directly connected to the culinary empire that I controlled, though she had no idea that her career trajectory depended entirely on relationships and networks that could disappear instantly if I chose to withdraw support or influence from the restaurants and suppliers that made her current success possible. But the most ironic aspect of Victoria's assumptions about my cooking was that she was actually observing master-level technique demonstrations every time she visited our family kitchen. The adjustments I made to seasoning, the timing of my sauce preparation, the texture assessment methods I used for pasta and risotto, these were all advanced professional techniques that represented the kind of intuitive expertise that separated master chefs from culinary school graduates who could follow recipes but couldn't improvise and adapt based on sensory feedback and deep understanding of ingredient behavior. When Victoria watched me prepare risotto without measuring ingredients, she assumed I was using imprecise traditional methods that could be improved through scientific measurement and modern cooking techniques. What she was actually observing was advanced technique mastery that allowed me to adjust liquid ratios, stirring patterns, and heat control based on visual and tactile cues that most professional chefs never learned to recognize, even after years of restaurant experience. The risotto technique that Victoria wanted to reduce to written measurements and precise ratios was actually a method that we taught as an advanced course at Rosetti Academy, where students spent weeks learning to recognize the subtle visual and textural changes that indicated proper rice absorption, optimal liquid temperature, and perfect texture achievement. Most culinary school programs didn't even attempt to teach this level of technique mastery because it required intensive hands-on training and cultural immersion that couldn't be achieved through classroom instruction or standardized curriculum. Sauce preparation methods that Victoria viewed as time-consuming traditional techniques were actually precision flavor development processes that created complex taste profiles impossible to achieve through contemporary shortcuts or commercial flavor enhancers. The 6-hour simmering time that she considered inefficient was actually a carefully controlled technique that allowed specific chemical reactions between ingredients, creating flavor compounds that couldn't be replicated through rapid cooking methods or artificial additives. Food scientists who had analyzed our sauce recipes found that the traditional slow cooking methods created unique flavor compounds through Maillard reactions and ingredient integration that couldn't be duplicated using pressure cooking, commercial bases, or contemporary efficiency techniques. The inefficient, traditional methods actually produced scientifically superior results that justified the time investment through flavor complexity and authenticity that customers could taste and that food critics could identify in blind comparisons. Victoria's assumption that traditional cooking methods needed improvement through modern techniques revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of why our restaurants commanded premium prices and maintained customer loyalty spanning multiple generations. Our success wasn't based on efficiency or convenience, it was based on authenticity and quality that required traditional techniques, premium ingredients, and time investments that most contemporary restaurants weren't willing to make. The cultural heritage and traditional knowledge that Victoria viewed as folklore actually represented our primary competitive advantage in markets where customers could distinguish between authentic Italian cuisine and contemporary interpretations that prioritized presentation and efficiency over flavor development and cultural authenticity. Our restaurants succeeded precisely because we preserved and honored traditional techniques that produced superior results, not despite their complexity and time requirements, but beyond the technical aspects of cooking expertise. What Victoria completely failed to understand was the scope of influence and industry control that our restaurant empire represented. The traditional Italian grandmother, whose recipes she was documenting, actually controlled enough industry relationships and financial resources to determine which restaurants succeeded, which chefs gained recognition, and which culinary trends achieved mainstream acceptance throughout the Northeast dining scene. Our restaurant group's purchasing power influenced ingredient pricing and availability for restaurants throughout the region. Our chef training and placement services determined staffing at dozens of prestigious establishments. Our relationships with food critics, industry publications, and awards organizations affected which restaurants received recognition and positive coverage that drove customer traffic and industry credibility. When food critics from major publications dined at restaurants throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, they often consulted with our culinary team for context about authentic Italian cuisine standards and cultural significance. Our recommendations influenced which restaurants received positive reviews, which chefs gained recognition for innovation and excellence, and which establishments were featured in articles about dining trends and culinary excellence. The James Beard Foundation regularly consulted with our organization about authentic Italian cuisine when evaluating restaurants and chefs for awards consideration. Our expertise in traditional techniques and cultural authenticity helped determine which contemporary interpretations of Italian cuisine maintained sufficient authenticity to warrant recognition, and which restaurants were dismissed as superficial. Appropriation without cultural understanding or technical mastery. Michelin Guide inspectors used our restaurants as benchmark standards when evaluating other Italian establishments throughout the Northeast. Our techniques, ingredient sourcing, and service standards provided reference points for determining which restaurants met the technical excellence and cultural authenticity required for Michelin recognition. Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and other major culinary publications featured our restaurants and chefs regularly in articles about Italian cuisine, traditional techniques, and authentic ingredients. Our recipes appeared in special issues about regional Italian cooking, holiday entertaining, and traditional family meals that preserved cultural heritage through contemporary application, but our influence extended beyond media recognition to practical industry control through supplier relationships, staff placement, and consulting services that affected restaurant operations throughout the region. Restaurants that maintained positive relationships with our organization gained access to premium ingredients, qualified staff, and industry connections that provided competitive advantages impossible to achieve independently. Conversely, restaurants that demonstrated disrespect for traditional techniques, cultural appropriation of Italian cuisine, or unethical treatment of elderly community members found themselves unable to access premium suppliers, hire qualified staff, or receive positive coverage from food critics and industry publications that respected our expertise and relied on our recommendations for authentic Italian cuisine evaluation. The industry blacklist that Victoria would soon experience wasn't just theoretical punishment. It was a practical reality that had ended careers of chefs and closed restaurants that violated the cultural respect and professional standards that we maintained throughout our network of industry relationships and business partnerships. Previous examples of this industry influence included the case of Bella Vista, a restaurant in Hoboken that had gained initial success by claiming to serve authentic family recipes from southern Italy while actually using commercial sauce bases and frozen pasta from food service suppliers. When we investigated and confirmed that they were misrepresenting their cuisine while charging premium prices for inauthentic food, our network of suppliers, critics, and industry professionals gradually withdrew support. Within 8 months, Bella Vista lost access to premium ingredients when suppliers chose not to renew contracts, received negative reviews from food critics who had been informed about their misrepresentation, and found themselves unable to hire qualified Italian-American chefs who respected authentic techniques and refused to participate in cultural appropriation for commercial gain. The restaurant eventually closed after losing customers who recognized the difference between authentic Italian cuisine and commercial imitations, and the chef owner found himself unable to secure positions at other Italian restaurants because his reputation for misrepresentation and cultural disrespect had spread throughout our professional network. Another example involved a young chef named David Chen who had trained at a prestigious culinary school and believed he could improve traditional Italian techniques through molecular gastronomy applications and contemporary presentation methods. He opened a restaurant called Nuova Italia that served what he described as evolved Italian cuisine for sophisticated palates. David's modifications to traditional recipes included using liquid nitrogen to create deconstructed tiramisu, replacing traditional pasta with vegetable-based alternatives made through advanced food processing, and serving reimagined osso buco that bore no resemblance to authentic Milanese preparation but used similar ingredient names to suggest traditional authenticity. When David's restaurant gained initial attention from food bloggers and trendy dining publications, he made the mistake of publicly criticizing traditional Italian cooking as outdated and claiming that elderly Italian-American cooks were holding back culinary evolution through their stubborn attachment to inefficient methods. Our response was swift and comprehensive. Food critics who respected authentic Italian cuisine received detailed information about traditional techniques and cultural significance that helped them evaluate David's restaurant accurately. Suppliers who provided premium Italian ingredients to our restaurant network chose not to work with establishments that showed disrespect for traditional techniques and cultural heritage. Industry publications that featured articles about authentic Italian cuisine began including discussions about the difference between respectful innovation and cultural appropriation, with specific examples of how traditional techniques achieved superior results compared to contemporary modifications that prioritized novelty over flavor development and cultural authenticity. Within 6 months, Nuova Italia had lost credibility with food critics who understood authentic Italian cuisine, faced significant increases in ingredient costs when premium suppliers declined to work with them, and struggled to attract customers who preferred genuine Italian dining experiences over molecular gastronomy experiments that bore little resemblance to traditional Italian food culture. David eventually closed his restaurant and attempted to secure positions at other establishments, but found that his reputation for disrespecting traditional techniques and elderly community members had made him unemployable at any restaurant that valued authentic Italian cuisine or maintained relationships with our professional network. These examples demonstrated that our industry influence wasn't based on vindictive retaliation but on professional standards and cultural respect that protected authentic Italian cuisine from commercialization and appropriation by chefs who viewed traditional techniques as raw material for contemporary experimentation without understanding their cultural significance or technical superiority. Victoria Sterling, with her notebook full of my traditional family recipes and her plans to create elevated versions of my cooking for contemporary restaurant service, was about to discover that some elderly Italian grandmothers possessed the power to either launch culinary careers to extraordinary heights or end them completely based on how those ambitious young chefs chose to treat traditional knowledge and the women who preserved these techniques through generations of family dedication and cultural pride. The family dinner that Victoria viewed as an opportunity to observe quaint home cooking techniques would reveal whether she understood that authentic Italian cuisine required respect, cultural sensitivity, and acknowledgement of the generations of expertise that traditional recipes represented, or whether she would demonstrate the arrogance and cultural appropriation that would cost her everything she thought she was building. In the culinary world, the modest kitchen where Victoria was about to insult my lasagna as trailer park slop was actually the command center of a $50 million culinary empire. And the woman she was preparing to dismiss as an outdated home cook controlled enough industry influence to determine whether promising young chefs achieved their dreams or disappeared from professional kitchens forever, depending on how they chose to honor or exploit the traditional knowledge that represented the foundation of authentic Italian cuisine in America. The first clear indication that Victoria Sterling viewed my cooking knowledge as her personal resource to exploit rather than family traditions to respect came during our Easter dinner in April 2023. Just 6 months before the family gathering that would destroy her culinary career. What initially seemed like enthusiastic interest in learning authentic Italian cooking techniques gradually revealed itself as systematic documentation of proprietary recipes and traditional knowledge that Victoria planned to commercialize through her restaurant work without any acknowledgement of their cultural significance or intellectual property value. During the Easter meal preparation, Victoria arrived at our house 3 hours early, claiming she wanted to help with cooking and learn authentic Italian Easter traditions that she could share with Michael's future children. Her eagerness to participate seemed touching and appropriate for a new family member who wanted to connect with her husband's cultural heritage, but her behavior throughout the afternoon revealed concerning patterns that suggested commercial, rather than cultural motivations for her sudden interest in traditional Italian cooking methods. "Elena, I brought my notebook so I can record everything properly," Victoria announced as she entered our kitchen, producing the same small journal she had used during previous family gatherings to document ingredient ratios and preparation techniques. "I want to make sure I understand all the traditional methods correctly so I can preserve them accurately for future generations." But instead of observing cooking techniques with the respectful attention of someone learning family traditions, Victoria approached my Easter meal preparation with the systematic documentation methods of someone conducting commercial research. She photographed every stage of food preparation, recorded detailed notes about ingredient sources and preparation timing, and asked specific questions about technique modifications and recipe scaling that revealed her interest in adapting my family recipes for restaurant service rather than preserving them for cultural transmission. "How would you adjust the seasoning ratios if you were making this lamb recipe for larger quantities?" she asked while watching me prepare our traditional Easter lamb with herbs and lemon that had been passed down through 4 generations of Italian women in our family. "I'm thinking about portion scaling and consistency maintenance for situations where someone might need to serve more people than a typical family gathering. Traditional family recipes are usually prepared for family-sized portions," I replied, testing whether Victoria understood that scaling family recipes for commercial use required different considerations than simply multiplying ingredients. When you prepare traditional dishes for larger groups, you need to understand how ingredient relationships change with quantity increases and how cooking times and techniques need to be adjusted to maintain authentic flavors and textures. "Right. That makes sense," Victoria agreed enthusiastically, writing notes that suggested she was treating my explanation as technical information rather than understanding the cultural context that surrounded traditional recipe preparation and family meal traditions. Are there any specific ratios or guidelines that help maintain consistency when adapting traditional recipes for different serving sizes? Her focus on scaling and consistency revealed that Victoria was thinking about my family recipes in terms of restaurant application rather than cultural preservation. Traditional Italian cooking wasn't designed for commercial scaling because it relied on intuitive adjustments, sensory feedback, and personal attention that couldn't be systematized for large quantity preparation without losing the essential qualities that made these dishes authentic and culturally significant. But Victoria's questions consistently demonstrated her assumption that traditional cooking knowledge could be reduced to quantifiable formulas that would allow her to reproduce authentic results through standardized methods and commercial kitchen equipment. She seemed frustrated when I explained that successful traditional cooking required developing sensory skills and cultural understanding that couldn't be learned through written instructions or formal training programs. There must be some basic principles or techniques that provide consistent results, Victoria persisted when I tried to explain that traditional lamb preparation required adjusting seasoning and cooking time based on the specific cut of meat, seasonal herb availability, and oven characteristics that varied with each preparation. Even traditional cooking has fundamental approaches that can be documented and replicated reliably. Traditional cooking succeeds because it adapts to variables rather than trying to control them, I explained, watching her pen hover over her notebook as she searched for specific information she could record and later reproduce without understanding the cultural knowledge and sensory experience that actually determine successful traditional cooking outcomes. Authentic Italian cooking requires understanding ingredients, recognizing sensory cues, and making adjustments based on experience and cultural knowledge that develops through years of practice and family transmission rather than through written recipes or standardized procedures. Victoria's disappointment with my explanation was obvious, and her continued attempts to extract quantifiable information revealed that she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of traditional cooking knowledge and its relationship to cultural heritage and family traditions that couldn't be commodified or commercialized without losing their essential authenticity and significance. During the Easter lamb preparation, Victoria's behavior became increasingly invasive and commercial as she photographed each step of the seasoning process, recorded detailed notes about herb selection and preparation timing, and even attempted to measure ingredients when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her documentation efforts went far beyond casual interest in family traditions and suggested systematic collection of proprietary information for potential commercial use. "Would you mind if I took a photo of the herb mixture?" Victoria asked, while I prepared the traditional seasoning blend that gave our Easter lamb its distinctive flavor profile. "I want to make sure I remember the exact proportions and ingredient combinations so I can recreate this accurately for Michael when we host our own Easter dinners." But instead of taking a simple reference photo, Victoria used her phone to capture detailed close-up images of the herb mixture from multiple angles, focusing specifically on ingredient ratios and preparation techniques that would allow her to reproduce the seasoning blend without understanding the cultural traditions and seasonal considerations that determined herb selection and preparation methods. "This herb combination is really unique," she commented while reviewing her photos and making additional notes about ingredient proportions. "I don't think I've seen this exact blend in any of the Italian cookbooks or restaurant menus I've studied. It has such an authentic character that would really enhance traditional Italian dishes in contemporary restaurant settings." Her comment revealed that Victoria was already thinking about incorporating my family's traditional herb blend into restaurant applications, treating our cultural heritage as ingredient inspiration for her own professional cooking rather than understanding that traditional seasoning blends represented generations of cultural knowledge that deserved respect and proper attribution if used in commercial contexts. Traditional herb blends often reflect regional preferences and seasonal availability that developed through generations of family cooking in specific geographical areas, I explained, trying to help Victoria understand that our Easter seasoning wasn't just a recipe but cultural knowledge that connected our family to specific traditions and regional heritage from our ancestors' homeland in Tuscany. "The herbs we use come from specific suppliers who provide authentic Italian varieties that maintain the flavor profiles and cultural authenticity that make these traditional dishes connect us to our heritage and family history." But Victoria's response demonstrated that she viewed my explanation as interesting cultural background rather than understanding that traditional recipes carried cultural significance that required respect and acknowledgement if adapted for contemporary use. Her focus remained on ingredient identification and technique documentation rather than cultural appreciation and respectful learning about family traditions and heritage preservation. The pattern of concerning behavior intensified during our preparation of traditional Easter bread, a complex recipe that required specific timing, technique mastery, and cultural understanding that couldn't be learned through observation alone. Victoria's attempts to document this traditional bread-making process revealed her assumption that she could acquire generations of cultural knowledge through systematic note-taking and photographic documentation. "This bread recipe looks incredibly complex," Victoria observed while watching me prepare the traditional Easter bread that our family had made for special occasions since my grandmother's generation. "Would you be willing to walk me through each step so I can understand the traditional technique properly?" Traditional bread making requires developing feeling for dough texture and fermentation timing that can't be learned through written instructions. I explained, beginning the kneading process that required recognizing tactile cues and making adjustments based on humidity, temperature, and ingredient variations that changed with each preparation. "But surely there are some basic guidelines about timing and technique that provide a foundation for learning traditional methods," Victoria replied, positioning herself to photograph the kneading process while taking notes about hand positioning and dough handling techniques. Her systematic documentation approach treated traditional bread making as technical information rather than cultural practice that required respectful learning and gradual skill development through family guidance and cultural immersion. Victoria seemed to believe that observing and recording traditional techniques would allow her to master cultural knowledge that actually required years of practice and cultural understanding to develop properly. Traditional bread making is about understanding how ingredients interact and recognizing when dough reaches optimal texture and fermentation levels, I continued, demonstrating the kneading rhythm and pressure adjustments that determine successful bread texture and flavor development. These skills develop through practice and cultural transmission rather than through documentation and reproduction attempts. But Victoria's attention remained focused on capturing technical details rather than understanding the cultural context and family significance that made traditional bread making a meaningful expression of heritage and family connection. Her questions consistently emphasized reproduction and scaling rather than cultural appreciation and respectful participation in family traditions. "How would someone know when the dough has reached the right consistency?" Victoria asked, taking detailed photos of the dough texture at different stages of kneading while recording notes about visual and tactile indicators that suggested proper development. "Would it be possible to achieve similar results using contemporary kitchen equipment like stand mixers or food processors that could provide more consistent mixing and timing control?" Her questions revealed that Victoria was already considering how to adapt traditional bread-making techniques for contemporary kitchen applications rather than understanding that traditional methods achieved superior results precisely because they relied on human judgment and cultural knowledge that couldn't be replicated through mechanical equipment or standardized procedures. The most troubling aspect of Victoria's behavior during Easter dinner preparation was her assumption that my willingness to include her in family cooking activities meant that our traditional recipes and techniques were freely available for her to study, document, and potentially incorporate into her own professional cooking without any acknowledgement of their cultural significance or intellectual property value. When I allowed Victoria to observe traditional cooking techniques during family gatherings, I was sharing cultural heritage and family traditions that should have been received with respect and appreciation for their cultural significance. But Victoria treated my openness as permission to conduct commercial research and collect proprietary information that she could adapt for her own professional advantage without understanding the cultural violations and intellectual property theft that her documentation efforts represented. "I really appreciate you letting me learn these authentic techniques," Victoria said while reviewing her extensive notes and photographs from our Easter cooking session. "This kind of traditional knowledge is so valuable for understanding authentic Italian cuisine and developing contemporary applications that honor traditional flavors while meeting modern dining expectations." Her comment revealed that Victoria was already planning to use our family's traditional knowledge for contemporary applications, rather than understanding that traditional recipes represented cultural heritage that required respect, acknowledgement, and proper attribution if used in professional contexts. The cultural insensitivity of Victoria's approach became even more apparent when she began discussing how traditional Italian cooking techniques could be improved through contemporary culinary science and modern kitchen equipment that would increase efficiency and consistency while maintaining essential flavor profiles. Traditional cooking methods often achieve excellent results through techniques that could be streamlined using modern equipment and scientific understanding, Victoria explained during a conversation about Italian cuisine and contemporary restaurant trends. "When you understand the science behind traditional techniques, you can preserve the important elements while eliminating time-consuming steps and improving consistency through precision control and automated equipment." This perspective revealed Victoria's fundamental misunderstanding of traditional cooking, which achieved its superior results through time-honored techniques that had been refined through generations of practice specifically because they produced optimal flavors and textures. Attempting to streamline traditional methods usually eliminated the precise elements that created authentic results and cultural authenticity, but Victoria's confidence in her ability to improve traditional techniques through formal culinary training in contemporary kitchen science created a sense of authority that extended to her interactions with our family's cultural heritage and traditional knowledge. She began positioning herself as someone who could help preserve traditional techniques by adapting them for contemporary use and broader accessibility. I think there's tremendous value in documenting traditional cooking methods and making them more accessible to contemporary home cooks who might not have access to authentic family knowledge, Victoria suggested during a family conversation about cultural preservation and traditional cooking education. These traditional techniques contain so much wisdom about flavor development and ingredient handling that could benefit people who want to cook authentic Italian food but don't have family traditions to guide them. While her suggestion sounded culturally supportive, it actually revealed Victoria's assumption that traditional cooking knowledge should be extracted from family contexts and made available for general use without proper cultural context, attribution, or respect for the communities that had developed and preserved these techniques through generations of cultural transmission and family dedication. Victoria's growing confidence in her understanding of traditional Italian cooking led to increasingly problematic suggestions about how our family's cultural knowledge could be shared and preserved for broader benefit. She began proposing projects that would document traditional recipes and techniques for educational purposes, apparently without understanding that such projects represented cultural appropriation if conducted without proper community involvement and cultural sensitivity. Elena, have you ever considered writing a cookbook that would preserve these traditional family recipes for future generations? Victoria suggested during a family dinner conversation in late spring 2023. These authentic techniques have such cultural value that they deserve broader preservation and appreciation beyond just family transmission. Traditional family recipes are usually preserved within families and communities rather than published for commercial distribution, I replied, testing whether Victoria understood the cultural considerations that surrounded traditional knowledge sharing and community intellectual property rights. Oh, I wasn't thinking about commercial publication, Victoria clarified quickly, apparently realizing that her suggestion might have sounded inappropriate or culturally insensitive. I was thinking more about cultural preservation and educational documentation that could help maintain traditional techniques for future generations who might not have access to authentic family cooking knowledge. But her clarification actually revealed that she didn't understand the difference between community-based cultural preservation and external documentation that extracted traditional knowledge from its cultural context for broader distribution without proper community involvement and cultural oversight. Victoria's suggestions about cookbook projects and traditional recipe documentation continued throughout the spring and early summer of 2023, gradually becoming more specific and commercial in scope as she gained confidence in her relationship with our family and her understanding of traditional cooking techniques. I've been thinking about traditional recipe preservation and how to make authentic techniques more accessible to contemporary cooks, Victoria mentioned during a family gathering in June 2023. There might be opportunities to collaborate with culinary schools or food magazines on educational projects that would document traditional methods while providing broader cultural education about authentic Italian cooking. Her mention of culinary schools and food magazines revealed that Victoria was already considering how to leverage our family's traditional knowledge for her own professional advancement and industry recognition, positioning herself as someone who could bridge traditional cooking and contemporary culinary education through documentation and educational projects. The progression of Victoria's behavior from respectful interest in family traditions to systematic documentation of proprietary knowledge and suggestions for commercial applications demonstrated a pattern of cultural appropriation and intellectual property exploitation that would culminate in the family dinner disaster that would destroy her culinary career. By the summer of 2023, Victoria had documented dozens of our family's traditional recipes, photographed our cooking techniques from multiple angles, and developed specific plans for incorporating traditional Italian cooking methods into contemporary restaurant applications and culinary education projects that would enhance her professional reputation and industry standing. But Victoria had no idea that every conversation about traditional recipe documentation, every suggestion about cultural preservation projects, and every assumption about her right to study and adapt our family's culinary knowledge was being observed and evaluated by someone whose industry influence could determine whether her culinary career flourished or ended permanently. The woman Victoria viewed as a generous source of traditional cooking knowledge and cultural education was actually documenting her cultural insensitivity, intellectual property violations, and commercial exploitation of family traditions that would ultimately provide the justification for industry consequences that would teach her the true cost of treating elderly relatives' cultural heritage as free resources for professional advancement. The stage was set for Victoria to face the ultimate test of her character and cultural sensitivity during a family dinner that would reveal whether she understood that traditional cooking knowledge deserved respect and acknowledgement, or whether she would demonstrate the arrogance and cultural appropriation that would cost her everything she thought she was building in the culinary world, where reputation and cultural respect determined long-term success and industry acceptance. The family dinner that would destroy Victoria Sterling's culinary career was planned for Saturday, October 14, 2023, as a celebration of Michael and Victoria's first wedding anniversary. What Victoria viewed as an opportunity to demonstrate her culinary sophistication and perhaps gather more traditional recipes for her professional advancement would become the most expensive evening of her life. Revealing her true character when she believed she was among people who couldn't threaten her rising career in the competitive New York restaurant scene. By October 2023, Victoria's systematic documentation of our family's traditional cooking knowledge had escalated to alarming levels of cultural appropriation and intellectual property theft. Her notebook had grown to over 200 pages of detailed recipes, technique descriptions, and ingredient sourcing information that represented millions of dollars in proprietary culinary knowledge. She had photographed every aspect of our cooking processes, recorded detailed notes about traditional preparation methods, and developed specific plans for incorporating our family's cultural heritage into her own professional cooking without any acknowledgement of their origins or cultural significance. But more concerning than her documentation efforts was Victoria's growing confidence about her authority to evaluate, criticize, and suggest improvements to traditional cooking methods that had been refined through generations of Italian culinary expertise. She had begun speaking about traditional Italian cooking with the condescending tone of someone who believed formal education and contemporary restaurant experience qualified her to judge techniques that she couldn't even begin to understand or properly execute. "I've been analyzing some of the traditional techniques I've observed during family gatherings," Victoria had announced during a phone conversation with Michael in early October, apparently unaware that I was listening from the kitchen while preparing dinner. "While these family recipes have wonderful authentic character, I think there are opportunities to enhance their appeal and efficiency through contemporary culinary applications that could make them more accessible to modern home cooks and restaurant diners." Her comment revealed that Victoria had moved beyond simple documentation to actively planning commercial exploitation of our family's traditional knowledge. She was no longer just stealing our recipes, she was preparing to present herself as someone who had enhanced traditional Italian cooking through her own professional expertise and culinary education. "What kind of enhancements are you thinking about?" Michael had asked, apparently unaware that his wife was discussing the commercialization of his grandmother's cultural heritage as if it were raw material for her professional advancement. "Well, for example, Elena's sauce recipes achieve excellent flavor profiles, but they require hours of preparation time that most contemporary cooks can't accommodate," Victoria had explained with the confident tone of someone who believed she understood traditional cooking well enough to improve it through modern modifications. "I've been experimenting with ways to preserve the essential flavor characteristics while reducing preparation time through contemporary techniques like pressure cooking, commercial flavor bases, and standardized ingredient ratios that would allow consistent reproduction in restaurant settings or busy home kitchens." Victoria was describing the complete bastardization of traditional Italian cooking, replacing slow flavor development with commercial shortcuts, eliminating the sensory skills and cultural knowledge that created authentic results, and reducing generations of culinary expertise to standardized formulas that could be mass-produced without understanding or respecting their cultural significance. But the most insulting aspect of Victoria's enhancement projects was her assumption that traditional Italian cooking needed improvement through her intervention, as if generations of Italian women had been too ignorant or incompetent to develop optimal cooking methods and required contemporary culinary school graduates to correct their inefficient techniques. "I think Elena would appreciate knowing that her traditional recipes could reach broader audiences and help more people experience authentic Italian flavors," Victoria had continued, apparently believing that cultural appropriation and commercial exploitation represented generous preservation of family heritage rather than theft of intellectual property and violation of cultural traditions. "These traditional techniques contain so much wisdom about flavor development that they deserve to be preserved and shared more widely through contemporary applications that honor their authenticity while making them practical for modern cooking contexts." Victoria's language revealed her sophisticated ability to frame cultural appropriation as cultural preservation, making intellectual property theft sound like generous educational service while planning to profit from traditional knowledge that belonged to our family and community rather than being freely available for her professional exploitation. The preparations for our anniversary dinner provided the perfect opportunity to observe Victoria's true character when she believed she was in a position of authority and expertise among family members who couldn't threaten her professional advancement or industry standing. I decided to prepare my traditional lasagna recipe, the same dish that appeared on the menu at La Tavola as lasagna della nonna, and commanded $65 per portion from customers who recognized authentic Italian comfort food elevated to fine dining excellence. But for this family dinner, I would prepare the lasagna exactly as I had learned from my grandmother, using traditional techniques, authentic ingredients, and the slow preparation methods that Victoria had been documenting and criticizing as inefficient and outdated. This would be Victoria's final test. Would she show respect for family traditions and cultural heritage, or would she reveal the arrogance and cultural insensitivity that justified the industry consequences I was prepared to implement? Victoria arrived at our house 2 hours before dinner, ostensibly to help with meal preparation but actually to conduct final documentation of traditional cooking techniques and gather additional information for her commercial appropriation projects. She brought her notebook, camera, and the confident attitude of someone who believed she understood traditional Italian cooking well enough to evaluate and potentially improve techniques that had been refined through generations of cultural expertise. "Elena, I'm so excited to help with dinner preparation," Victoria announced as she entered our kitchen, immediately positioning herself to observe and document whatever traditional techniques I would demonstrate during our anniversary meal preparation. "I've been practicing some of the traditional methods I've learned from watching you cook, and I'd love to get your feedback on my technique and understanding." "What traditional methods have you been practicing?" I asked, curious about how Victoria had attempted to reproduce techniques that required cultural knowledge and sensory skills that couldn't be learned through observation and note-taking alone. "I've been working on pasta sauce preparation using the traditional slow cooking methods you've shown me," Victoria replied with obvious pride in her efforts to master traditional techniques through contemporary application and restaurant equipment. "I think I've figured out how to achieve similar flavor profiles using pressure cooking and commercial flavor enhancers that reduce preparation time while maintaining authentic taste characteristics." Her explanation revealed that Victoria had completely missed the essential principles of traditional sauce preparation, attempting to reproduce authentic flavors through shortcuts and artificial ingredients rather than understanding that slow cooking and authentic ingredients were essential components of the technique that couldn't be replaced without destroying the cultural authenticity and flavor complexity that made traditional Italian sauces distinctive and valuable. Traditional sauce preparation achieves its flavor through specific ingredient interactions that require time and authentic ingredients, I explained, beginning preparation of the lasagna sauce that would become the center of our family crisis. Contemporary shortcuts and commercial enhancers create different flavor profiles that may seem similar but lack the depth and complexity that comes from traditional techniques and authentic ingredient sourcing. But surely the goal is achieving flavor results that satisfy contemporary palates, Victoria replied with the confident logic of someone who believed customer satisfaction was more important than cultural authenticity or traditional technique mastery. "If you can create flavors that people enjoy using more efficient methods, isn't that actually an improvement over traditional techniques that require more time and effort without necessarily producing better results?" Her question revealed the fundamental philosophical difference between authentic traditional cooking and contemporary restaurant efficiency. Victoria viewed cooking as a technical problem to be solved through optimization and standardization, while traditional Italian cooking represented cultural expression and heritage preservation that required respect for time-honored methods and authentic ingredients regardless of convenience or efficiency considerations. "Traditional cooking isn't just about achieving flavor results," I explained while browning the meat for our lasagna sauce using techniques that had been passed down through 4 generations of Italian women. "It's about preserving cultural heritage, honoring family traditions, and maintaining connections to ancestral knowledge and community identity that give traditional dishes their meaning and significance beyond just taste satisfaction." "Of course, cultural heritage is important," Victoria agreed quickly, apparently recognizing that her previous comments might have sounded culturally insensitive. "But I think tradition can be honored while also making traditional techniques more accessible to contemporary cooks who might not have time for traditional preparation methods or access to authentic ingredients." But her clarification actually revealed that she didn't understand the difference between honoring tradition and appropriating traditional knowledge for contemporary convenience. Traditional techniques achieved their results through specific methods and ingredients that couldn't be modified without losing their essential character and cultural authenticity. As I continued preparing the lasagna sauce, Victoria's documentation efforts became increasingly invasive and commercial. She photographed every stage of the cooking process, recorded detailed notes about ingredient proportions and preparation, timing, and asked specific questions about technique modifications that revealed her ongoing plans to commercialize our family's traditional knowledge. "Would you mind if I recorded a video of your sauce preparation technique?" Victoria asked while I seasoned the sauce with herbs and spices that created the distinctive flavor profile that had made our restaurants famous throughout the Northeast. "I want to make sure I capture all the subtle technique details that might be difficult to describe in written notes." "Why do you need video documentation of family cooking techniques?" I asked directly, testing whether Victoria would acknowledge her commercial intentions or continue pretending that her documentation efforts were for family preservation purposes. "I'm just trying to learn traditional methods as thoroughly as possible," Victoria replied with the diplomatic evasion of someone who didn't want to reveal her true motivations. "Video documentation helps me understand the visual and timing cues that are important for successful traditional cooking." But her explanation didn't address why she needed such detailed documentation for personal learning, and her systematic approach to capturing proprietary information revealed commercial rather than cultural motivations for her intense interest in traditional cooking techniques. While the sauce simmered, I began preparing the lasagna pasta using traditional hand-rolling methods that created the texture and thickness that distinguished authentic Italian pasta from commercial alternatives. Victoria observed this process with obvious fascination, taking detailed notes and photographs while asking questions that revealed her assumptions about how traditional pasta making could be improved through contemporary equipment and standardized procedures. "The hand-rolling technique creates such interesting texture variations," Victoria commented while photographing my pasta preparation from multiple angles. "I wonder if you could achieve similar results using contemporary pasta machines that provide more consistent thickness control and faster production times." "Traditional hand-rolling achieves specific texture characteristics that machine production can't replicate," I explained, demonstrating the subtle pressure variations and rolling rhythm that created pasta texture optimal for sauce absorption and authentic Italian flavor integration. "Contemporary machines prioritize consistency and speed over the texture variations that actually enhance flavor development and cultural authenticity." "But wouldn't consistency be beneficial for restaurant service where customers expect uniform presentation and reliable preparation times?" Victoria asked with obvious confidence that restaurant efficiency requirements justified modifying traditional techniques for commercial convenience. Her question revealed that Victoria viewed traditional cooking through the lens of restaurant operations rather than understanding that traditional techniques achieved superior results precisely because they prioritized quality and authenticity over efficiency and standardization. As I assembled the lasagna using traditional layering techniques and authentic Italian cheeses imported through our restaurant network, Victoria's comments became increasingly critical of traditional methods and ingredients. She began suggesting modifications that would enhance the dish through contemporary presentations and improved ingredient selections that reflected current restaurant trends rather than cultural authenticity. "The traditional layering approach creates such rich flavors," Victoria observed while taking detailed photos of my lasagna assembly process. "I've been experimenting with deconstructed presentations that maintain the essential flavor combinations while creating more contemporary visual appeal for restaurant service." "Have you considered using contemporary cheese alternatives that might provide more consistent melting properties and neutral flavor profiles that would allow the sauce flavors to be more prominent in the final dish?" Her suggestions revealed that Victoria was already planning to use our family's traditional lasagna recipe as the foundation for contemporary restaurant interpretations that would eliminate the authentic ingredients and traditional techniques that gave the dish its cultural significance and distinctive character. Traditional Italian lasagna achieves its character through specific cheese selections and layering techniques that create flavor integration and texture contrasts, I explained while continuing the assembly process that Victoria was documenting for her own commercial use. Contemporary modifications usually eliminate the precise elements that make traditional Italian dishes authentic and culturally meaningful. But contemporary diners often prefer dishes that incorporate familiar flavors in updated presentations that feel more sophisticated and innovative, Victoria replied with the market-driven logic of someone who believed customer preferences justified cultural appropriation and traditional technique abandonment. "If you can preserve the essential taste elements while updating the presentation and preparation methods, you're actually making traditional dishes more accessible to broader audiences who might not appreciate traditional presentations." Victoria's comment revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of traditional Italian cuisine, which achieved its value through authenticity and cultural respect rather than contemporary appeal and market accessibility. Traditional dishes weren't meant to be modified for broader audiences. They were meant to be preserved and honored for their cultural significance and historical importance, while the lasagna baked in our traditional wood-fired oven that Antonio had imported from Naples specifically for authentic Italian cooking, Victoria's behavior reached new levels of cultural insensitivity and commercial exploitation. She attempted to document our oven techniques, measure cooking temperatures, and record timing information that would allow her to reproduce authentic Italian cooking results using contemporary restaurant equipment. This wood-fired oven creates such distinctive flavors, Victoria commented while taking detailed photos of the oven interior and temperature measurement attempts. I wonder if you could achieve similar results using contemporary convection ovens with wood smoking techniques. That would provide more precise temperature control and faster cooking times. Wood-fired cooking achieves specific flavor development through direct wood contact and temperature variations that contemporary ovens can't replicate, I explained, testing whether Victoria understood that authentic Italian cooking required traditional equipment and techniques that couldn't be substituted without losing essential character. The wood selection, firing techniques, and temperature management create flavor compounds and cooking environments that are integral to authentic Italian cuisine rather than just convenient traditional methods that can be updated through contemporary alternatives. But surely contemporary restaurant kitchens could adapt wood-fired techniques using modern equipment that provides better control and consistency. Victoria persisted with obvious confidence that traditional cooking could be improved through contemporary kitchen science and standardized procedures. Her insistence on improving traditional techniques revealed that Victoria viewed our family's cultural heritage as inefficient methods that required her professional expertise to modernize and optimize for contemporary use. Rather than understanding that traditional techniques represented sophisticated culinary knowledge that achieved superior results through time-honored methods. As our anniversary dinner concluded and family members gathered around the table to enjoy the traditional Italian meal that represented generations of cultural heritage and family tradition, Victoria made the comment that would destroy her culinary career and teach her the most expensive lesson about respecting elderly relatives and honoring traditional cooking knowledge. Elena, this is certainly authentic, Victoria said while examining the lasagna that I had prepared using traditional techniques and authentic ingredients that represented millions of dollars in proprietary culinary knowledge. It's very traditional and has that rustic home cooking character that I'm sure your family appreciates. Her diplomatic tone suggested that she was preparing to offer professional criticism disguised as constructive feedback, but her choice of words like rustic and home cooking character revealed her condescending attitude toward traditional Italian cuisine that she viewed as unsophisticated compared to contemporary restaurant presentations. The flavors are quite robust, though I think contemporary diners might find the presentation and preparation style a bit overwhelming, Victoria continued with the confident authority of someone who believed her culinary education qualified her to evaluate and criticize traditional Italian cooking techniques. In professional kitchens, we've learned to refine traditional flavors while creating more elegant presentations that appeal to sophisticated palates. This kind of hearty, rustic approach might work well for family gatherings, but it would need significant refinement for contemporary dining contexts. Victoria was criticizing the same lasagna recipe that earned $65 per portion at our Michelin-starred restaurant and had been praised by food critics from the New York Times as the definitive example of authentic Italian comfort food elevated to fine dining excellence. She was insulting techniques that represented generations of Italian culinary expertise while positioning herself as more sophisticated than women whose cooking knowledge had built a $50 million restaurant empire. But Victoria wasn't finished revealing her true character and assumptions about traditional cooking. As she continued eating, her comments became increasingly critical and culturally insensitive, demonstrating the arrogance and disrespect that would justify the industry consequences that would destroy her career permanently. To be completely honest, Elena, this lasagna reminds me of something you might find at a small-town Italian restaurant or maybe a church dinner, Victoria announced with obvious condescension, apparently believing that comparing our families' traditional cooking to small-town establishments represented insightful culinary criticism rather than revealing her own ignorance about authentic Italian cuisine. It has that heavy, old-fashioned character that I'm sure was popular in previous generations, but contemporary Italian restaurants have really evolved beyond this kind of rustic, home-style preparation. Victoria was describing the same cooking style that had earned our restaurant's James Beard nominations, Michelin recognition, and praise from the most respected food critics in America. She was insulting techniques that we taught to professional chefs who paid $85,000 to learn authentic Italian cooking methods at our exclusive culinary academy. The sauce is quite thick and rustic compared to contemporary Italian preparations that focus on lighter, more refined flavor profiles, Victoria continued with obvious confidence in her professional assessment of traditional cooking techniques. And the cheese selection feels very traditional in a way that might not appeal to modern palates that have been educated by sophisticated Italian restaurants and contemporary culinary trends. But Victoria still wasn't finished demonstrating her cultural insensitivity and professional arrogance. As she pushed the lasagna around her plate with obvious distaste, she made the comment that would cost her everything she thought she was building in the culinary world where reputation and respect for tradition determined long-term success. If I'm being completely honest, Victoria said with the cruel confidence of someone who believed she was among people who couldn't threaten her professional standing, this lasagna tastes like something you'd find at a trailer park potluck or maybe a budget family restaurant that doesn't understand contemporary Italian cuisine. The preparation style and ingredient selections are just so basic and unsophisticated compared to what professional kitchens are producing today. It's the kind of heavy, old-fashioned cooking that gives Italian-American cuisine a reputation for being unsophisticated and culturally outdated. Victoria Sterling had just insulted the cooking of someone whose industry influence could end her career with a single phone call, calling techniques worth millions of dollars trailer park slop, while sitting at the table of the woman who controlled the restaurant empire that determined success and failure in the Northeast culinary scene. But Victoria had no idea that the woman whose cooking she had just humiliated in front of her family was Elena Rosetti, executive culinary director of Rosetti Hospitality Group, owner of 15 Michelin-starred restaurants, and the person whose recommendation could either launch culinary careers to extraordinary heights or destroy them so completely that the offending chefs would never work in professional kitchens again. The silence that followed Victoria's insult was deafening. Michael looked mortified by his wife's behavior, but clearly didn't understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. Our other family members sat in stunned disbelief that someone would show such disrespect for traditional cooking and family hospitality. But I felt the calm clarity that comes from finally seeing someone's true character revealed completely. "Victoria," I said quietly, setting down my fork and looking directly at the young woman who had just destroyed her culinary career through arrogance and cultural insensitivity, "I think it's time you learned who you've been insulting for the past 18 months. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked with obvious confusion, apparently unable to understand why her professional criticism of traditional cooking had created such tension at our family dinner. "I mean that the trailer park slop you just described is the same recipe that appears on the menu at La Tavola, our flagship restaurant in Manhattan, where it sells for $65 per portion to customers who recognize authentic Italian cuisine," I explained, watching Victoria's expression change as she began to understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. "The rustic, unsophisticated cooking techniques you've been documenting and planning to improve are the same methods that have earned our restaurant group 3 James Beard nominations, 15 Michelin stars, and recognition as the definitive authority on authentic Italian cuisine in America." Victoria's face went pale as she began to comprehend that the elderly Italian grandmother whose cooking she had been insulting and whose recipes she had been stealing actually controlled the industry that determined her professional success or failure. "Elena, I didn't realize." Victoria stammered, but I wasn't finished explaining the consequences of her cultural insensitivity and intellectual property theft. "The traditional cooking knowledge you've been documenting in your notebook for 18 months represents proprietary recipes worth millions of dollars in intellectual property," I continued with the calm authority of someone delivering justice rather than revenge. "The inefficient traditional methods you've been planning to improve and commercialize are the same techniques that we teach to professional chefs who pay $85,000 to study at our culinary academy, and the outdated ingredients you wanted to replace with contemporary alternatives are sourced through exclusive supplier relationships that control premium ingredient access throughout the Northeast restaurant industry." But more importantly, I added, delivering the lesson that would teach Victoria the true cost of disrespecting elderly relatives and exploiting cultural heritage, "The woman whose cooking you just called trailer park slop controls the industry. Relationships that determine whether ambitious young chefs like yourself succeed in the culinary world or disappear from professional kitchens forever." Victoria's notebook full of stolen recipes suddenly represented evidence of intellectual property theft rather than family tradition preservation. Her plans to commercialize our family's cultural heritage became cultural appropriation that violated the professional ethics and cultural respect standards that our industry maintained. Her condescending attitude toward traditional cooking revealed character flaws that made her unemployable at any restaurant that valued authentic cuisine and respectful treatment of cultural heritage. "Elena, please, I was just offering professional feedback based on contemporary culinary standards," Victoria pleaded, apparently believing that explaining her motivations would somehow minimize the consequences of insulting someone whose industry influence could destroy her career permanently. "I didn't mean to offend you or disrespect family traditions. I was trying to appreciate traditional cooking while suggesting ways to make it more accessible to contemporary audiences." "Victoria, you weren't offering professional feedback," I replied with the finality of someone delivering consequences that had been earned through repeated cultural insensitivity and intellectual property violations. "You were insulting traditional Italian cooking while sitting at the table of someone whose expertise and industry influence exceeds your own by decades of experience and millions of dollars in restaurant empire value. But more importantly, you were demonstrating the kind of cultural disrespect and professional arrogance that makes you unsuitable for working in authentic Italian restaurants or any establishments that value traditional techniques and cultural heritage preservation." The consequences for Victoria began immediately and escalated rapidly as word of her behavior spread throughout our industry network. Within 24 hours of our anniversary dinner, every major Italian restaurant in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut had received information about Victoria's cultural insensitivity, intellectual property theft, and professional arrogance toward traditional cooking and elderly community members. Marcus Webb, the head chef at Elena Rosetti Academy graduate, received a detailed report about Victoria's behavior along with copies of her notebook documenting stolen recipes and her plans to commercialize traditional knowledge without attribution. Marcus terminated Victoria's employment immediately, explaining that cultural appropriation and disrespect for traditional cooking violated the professional ethics standards that their restaurant maintained. Within 1 week, Victoria discovered that every premium ingredient supplier in the region had discontinued service to any restaurant where she worked, making it impossible for her to source the authentic Italian ingredients that created competitive advantage for upscale Italian establishments. Our supplier network received detailed information about Victoria's cultural insensitivity and intellectual property violations, along with instructions to refuse service to any establishment that employed her. Food critics from major publications received comprehensive background information about Victoria's theft of traditional recipes and her insulting comments about authentic Italian cooking techniques. Her name became associated with cultural appropriation and professional disrespect that made positive restaurant reviews impossible for any establishment foolish enough to hire her. The Rosetti Academy Alumni Network, which included head chefs at prestigious restaurants throughout North America and Europe, received warnings about Victoria's character flaws and cultural insensitivity. Academy graduates refused to work with her, hire her, or recommend her for positions at restaurants that valued authentic cooking and respectful treatment of traditional knowledge. Culinary schools throughout the Northeast received detailed reports about Victoria's intellectual property theft and cultural appropriation, making it impossible for her to secure teaching positions or continuing education opportunities that could have helped her rebuild her damaged reputation and professional standing. Within 3 months of our anniversary dinner, Victoria had lost her job, her industry reputation, her access to premium suppliers, and any possibility of working in authentic Italian restaurants or establishments that valued traditional cooking and cultural respect. The ambitious young chef who had planned to build her career by improving and commercializing traditional Italian cooking found herself completely excluded from the industry that had once seemed to offer unlimited advancement opportunities. Victoria made numerous attempts to restore her professional reputation through apologies, explanations of her behavior, and promises about future respect for traditional cooking and cultural heritage. She contacted culinary schools about remedial training in cultural sensitivity, approached Italian cultural organizations about volunteer work that could demonstrate her commitment to heritage preservation, and even attempted to return the stolen recipes and delete her documentation of proprietary techniques. But the damage was permanent and irreversible. The restaurant industry, particularly establishments specializing in authentic ethnic cuisine, operates on relationships and reputation that require absolute trust and cultural respect. Victoria's behavior during our anniversary dinner had revealed character flaws that made her unsuitable for working with traditional cooking, elderly community members, or cultural heritage that required protection from appropriation and commercial exploitation. The notebook full of stolen recipes that Victoria had accumulated during 18 months of systematic documentation became evidence of intellectual property theft rather than family tradition preservation. Her plans to improve and commercialize traditional techniques revealed cultural insensitivity that violated the ethical standards maintained by restaurants that valued authentic cuisine and respectful treatment of cultural heritage. Most devastatingly, Victoria's insulting comments about traditional Italian cooking demonstrated the kind of professional arrogance and cultural ignorance that made her unemployable at any establishment that maintained relationships with authentic Italian suppliers, traditional cooking experts, or community organizations that preserved cultural heritage through family traditions and community knowledge. Within 6 months of calling my lasagna trailer park slop, Victoria Sterling had been effectively blacklisted from the culinary industry, unable to secure employment at restaurants that valued authentic cooking, cultural respect, or professional ethics that protected traditional knowledge from appropriation and commercial exploitation. The ambitious young chef who had believed her formal education and contemporary restaurant experience qualified her to evaluate and improve traditional Italian cooking discovered that some elderly grandmothers possess the power to determine whether promising culinary careers flourish or disappear entirely based on how those young professionals choose to treat cultural heritage and the women who preserve traditional knowledge through generations of family dedication. Victoria's final attempt to restore her career involved moving to California and changing her professional name, hoping to escape the reputation for cultural insensitivity and intellectual property theft that had made her unemployable in Northeast restaurants. But the culinary industry is surprisingly small and well-connected, and word of her behavior had spread throughout professional networks that valued authentic cooking and cultural respect. Today, 5 years after our anniversary dinner, Victoria works as a line cook at a chain restaurant that specializes in mass-produced, Italian-inspired food that bears no resemblance to authentic Italian cuisine. Her culinary school education, restaurant experience, and ambitious plans for professional advancement became worthless when she demonstrated that she viewed traditional cooking as raw material for contemporary exploitation rather than understanding that cultural heritage requires respect, acknowledgement, and proper treatment regardless of professional convenience or personal advancement opportunities. The lasagna recipe that Victoria insulted as trailer park slop continues to earn $65 per portion at La Tavola, where food critics praise it as an authentic masterpiece that transports diners directly to traditional Italian family kitchens, while maintaining the technical excellence and presentation standards that define contemporary fine dining at its highest levels. Our Rosetti Academy continues training 12 students annually in traditional Italian cooking techniques, with graduates commanding premium salaries at the world's most prestigious restaurants. The waiting list for admission extends over 4 years, and we regularly receive applications from Michelin-starred chefs who want to master authentic traditional techniques that can't be learned through contemporary culinary education or restaurant experience alone. The traditional cooking knowledge that Victoria attempted to steal and commercialize through her documentation efforts remains protected within our family and community, shared only with students and chefs who demonstrate genuine respect for cultural heritage and commitment to preserving traditional techniques without exploiting them for personal advancement or commercial gain that ignores their cultural significance. My modest kitchen in Westfield, New Jersey, continues serving as the testing laboratory where I develop recipes that appear in our Michelin-starred restaurants, generate millions of dollars in revenue, and preserve traditional Italian cooking techniques for future generations who understand that authentic cuisine requires respect, cultural sensitivity, and acknowledgement of the communities that developed and preserved these techniques through centuries of family dedication and cultural transmission. Sometimes the most important lesson you can teach ambitious young professionals is that traditional knowledge and cultural heritage aren't free resources available for appropriation and exploitation, but valuable intellectual property that belongs to communities and families who have preserved these techniques through generations of dedication, sacrifice, and cultural pride that deserve respect regardless of contemporary convenience or professional advancement opportunities. Victoria Sterling learned that elderly Italian grandmothers who appear to be simple home cooks may actually control industry empires worth millions of dollars, possess the power to launch or destroy culinary careers, and maintain the cultural authority to determine whether young professionals deserve access to traditional knowledge or should be excluded from authentic cooking communities based on their treatment of elders and respect for cultural heritage. The anniversary dinner that seemed like an opportunity for Victoria to demonstrate her culinary sophistication became the most expensive lesson of her life about the true cost of cultural insensitivity, intellectual property theft, and professional arrogance toward women whose cooking expertise and industry influence she couldn't even begin to comprehend or respect. What would you have done if someone insulted your family's traditional cooking as trailer park slop while secretly planning to steal your recipes for their own professional advancement? Have you ever encountered people who assumed your knowledge and expertise were freely available for their exploitation because they viewed you as powerless or outdated? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if this story has inspired you to examine your own assumptions about elderly relatives and traditional knowledge, and the importance of treating cultural heritage with the respect and acknowledgement it deserves regardless of your own professional ambitions or contemporary convenience. And if you found this story of culinary justice and cultural respect resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who discovered that underestimating elderly relatives and exploiting traditional knowledge can result in consequences more expensive than they could ever imagine, and more satisfying than justice usually provides in real life. Remember, traditional knowledge isn't free intellectual property available for appropriation. It's cultural heritage that belongs to communities and families who have earned the right to determine how it's shared, acknowledged, and preserved. For future generations who understand that authentic cuisine requires respect, humility, and recognition of the expertise that grandmothers represent rather than assuming they're just outdated home cooks whose techniques need improvement through contemporary intervention. The lasagna that Victoria called trailer park slop continues earning premium prices and critical acclaim, while the ambitious young chef who insulted it works at a chain restaurant serving mass-produced food to customers who can't distinguish between authentic Italian cuisine and contemporary imitations that prioritize convenience over cultural authenticity and traditional expertise. Sometimes justice comes with compound interest, calculated over generations of cultural preservation, and payable in full to those who demonstrate that elderly relatives deserve respect. Traditional knowledge requires acknowledgement, and cultural heritage should be honored rather than exploited by ambitious young professionals who assume they can improve techniques that represent centuries of refinement through their own limited education and contemporary restaurant experience. The most expensive meal of Victoria's life cost her everything she thought she was building toward, while teaching thousands of viewers that traditional cooking represents sophisticated expertise that deserves respect. Cultural heritage requires protection from appropriation, and elderly relatives may possess the power to determine your entire professional future based on how you choose to treat their knowledge, traditions, and lifetime achievements in preserving cultural authenticity for future generations who understand its true value. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.